Here we go. All ones.
I was fighting a battle in the present, but it was the stone golem's words from the past that troubled me the most. Our squad was outnumbered tenfold, and my remaining comrades were slowly succumbing one by one to their long-awaited deaths. But how lucky they were to go down with such a roar. I, on the other hand, bore a heavy burden that held me far from my glorious end. Thoughts of the stone golem flashed through my mind as the clashing blades and the rumble of battle cries surrounded me like a dull bubble. I pictured her amber eyes, her furrowed brow, and her secret smile as she listened to my endless insights. She wasn't one for enthusiasm, or one for talking, much at all for that matter, but I relished every single minuscule grunt of reaction I ever invoked from her. I relied on the stone golem's ear, her acceptance. She relied on my knowledge, my power to teach her. And she had one hell of a temper that needed tethering. A blade fell towards me, slashing through both air and my thoughts as I dodged to the side. The berserker was bloodied from battle, his mouth frothing, his eyes empty as though lost in his own adrenaline. Shek warriors were never afraid of battle. It was what we lived for. But I was frightened to death on this particular day. I didn't enjoy fighting. I was an intellect at heart, teased and mocked simply because I was able to read. But I was drilled enough, at least. Since I was barely able to hold a sword, I could stave off death. This berserker was not going to kill me yet. My dead-eyed opponent swiped at me once more with a gurgled yell. He fell with a thud to my feet, a stab to the heart. How free he was to finally escape to the other side without burden. The battlefield before me began to look like a rusty red sea of berserker cloaks, my allies engulfed within it, forever lost within its currents. I found myself changing in the midst of it. It was habit, after all, while the stone golem's last words echoed through my head. Her eyes showed me a vulnerability I've never seen before, a desperation that made my blood run cold. She needed me, my head, my sanity, in the days ahead more than ever. Bayan, I am not ready for you to die yet. My memories were shaken from me once again as a saber shot towards my eye. I swerved and darted from the woman's side. She was open. I lunged my blade. It eased through the flesh, right on target. I wasn't ready to die yet. For crawl! A distant yell sounded from Kana, my last standing comrade. I skirted around another swoop of a sword as another enemy came to my right. A duck and a blow on his abdomen right on target. There was a mighty roar in the background as Kana hit the ground as if in unison with my own victim. See you on the other side, Ken, I whisper. Twisting on my heels, I faced my enemies. Kana had been my only ally left. I was now alone. Two women stepped forward, baring their teeth. The rest stood watching, beating their swords into the sand, their eyes lit up in expectation for my gory death. I raised my sword and edged backwards, plotting my next move. One of my challengers, as tall as she was wide, swung a torturous sword, spiked and cruel. The other, small and wiry, donned a dark scar upon her left eye and a growl upon her lip. They exchanged glances before charging with an ear-piercing shriek. The big one clashed, her spiked blade against mine, pushing with all her monstrous might. Nimble and dance-like, the other slashes at my side in a frenzy, squealing with delight. I dropped my sword and spun away. The big woman stumbled forward, and as my blade clanged across the floor, blood spots dripped on the sand as I crouched, pulling out a second knife and panting like a cornered bone dog. A Shek never surrenders, and a Shek never feels fear. My heart was pounding. I'm not ready for you to die yet. I squeezed my eyes closed and shook the words from my head once again. I had barely jumped to my feet before the scarred one lunged at me a second time, a bloodthirsty glint in her eye. The tip of her sword slid across my armor as I twisted backwards and kicked her to the floor. It was barely a hit, but the impact still knocked the breath from me. I am not ready for you to die yet. The words sank through my head as I faced my own death, blades glittering in the sunlight. Reality stung me and the battlefield fell silent as I lost myself in my own head. The war, time itself, had stopped for me. I couldn't let them take my life, not yet. My knee dropped clumsily to the dirt, next a clunk as my knife fell to the ground. Coward! The scarred one snarled. I dropped my other knee, the sand crunching underneath it. Stand up and fight, the other spat. A dishonor to you and your whore queen. I leaned back on my heels and touched my fingertips to the dirt. It felt comforting, seeking its gritty asylum. My enemies had stopped goading me by now. Instead, they exchanged glances, silent gasps of disappointment. I slowly closed my eyes. It was so quiet. I felt the sharp blow to my temple, and then black. I awoke to the familiar sound of desert wind and the warmth of the afternoon sun singeing my naked skin. My body felt broken. I reached my right arm behind me to push myself up, but instead of movement, there was only the crunching of bones. With a cry of pain, I turned my eyes towards the mangled arm. This was my punishment. I squeezed myself up to sitting, broken ribs cracking as I inched myself up. I gently wiggled the fingers of my other hand, still working. Holding my breath, I slowly raised my arm up in the air, grasping for what should be there, but there was nothing. I grasped further, slightly more frantically, until I found what I was looking for. The stub of a broken horn. My final punishment. Forever branded a coward. Never again a warrior. I was nothing but a ghost. But at least a ghost could watch over its loved ones better than a corpse. "Oi, you don't look good. You okay there, boy?" A husky voice yelled from behind. I stumbled behind myself to find a caravan in the distance. A swiny gray-whiskered merchant with a guard and pack-gur. I simply stared on numb. The man winced at my battered body and bit his lip. "Jump on, I'll take you to the city." It was a bumpy ride, each clumsy bounce jarring my fractured bones. The old man and his guards didn't bother me with small talk. Likely my dead stare told them all they needed to know. Thoughts of uncertainty plagued my thoughts of how the stone golem would react to a dead man walking. Despite her worried last words, no battle had ever been so frightening as the thought of facing her disdain. We reached the northern plains of Agmeg, where the old man dropped me off. From there I traced to the capital with a knot in my stomach and a limp in my step. I was greeted at the gate with a spit and a snarl from the guards, once my kin. The glares burned through me, heavy with hatred and pity as I dragged myself through the city streets. Stumbling through the heavy iron doors of the citadel, I was finally reunited with the stone golem. There she stood, dignified and tall, clad in fine armor. Her eyes watched on, her composure unmoved by my presence. As to the stone golem, she never was one easily moved. The numbness I felt before had now melted away, and it hurt to just stand before her. Unable to maintain my show of dignity, my head dropped, eyes fixed upon the dirt. Then a touch on my chin. 2 fingers nudged my head back up. There she was, those amber eyes still fixed upon mine, unbroken, though glassier than before. Mutters emanated throughout the hall as the other warriors looked on with scorn. "More time for those books," she said, a glint in her eye as she peeled the tattered seal from my chest plate. She pulled the blade from my sheath and turned away. The smell of iron and musk, the feel of warm air, and the sounds of clanking swords from the armory all returned to me. I lost my ticket to the other side and my life as I knew it, but for the stone golem I would live 1,000 defeats.